Hi, good day everyone. For today's video, I will be discussing to you about the rules of Frisbee or Ultimate. Let's start. 1. Spirit of the game. Ultimate is a non-contact, self-officiated sport. So, pag sinabi nating Frisbee, hindi siya physical contact unlike sa basketball. Kasi yung Frisbee is all about the flying disc naman yung ginagamit. So, skills pa rin. All players are responsible for administering and adhering to the rules. Ultimate relies upon the spirit of the game that places the responsibility of fair play on every player. It is trusted that no player will intentionally break the rules, thus there are no harsh penalties for inadvertent breaches, but rather a method for resuming play in a manner which stimulates that would most likely have occurred had there been no breach. If there is a deliberate or egregious breach of the rules of spirit of the game, the captains should discuss this and determine the appropriate outcome even that outcome is not in accordance with a specific rule. So, ibig sabihin, sa spirit of the game, sa rules, automatically what we call this, the leader of the team discuss about the rules. Ibig sabihin, alam naman siguro ng mga team or every player yung spirit of the game. But yung point talaga ng leader dito is to inform them to be clear. Yun. Players should be mindful of acts that they are acting as referees in any arbitration between teams. Players must know the rules, of course, that dapat necessary talaga yan. Know the rules, be fair-minded and objective, be truthful, explain their viewpoint clearly and briefly, allow opponents a reasonable chance to speak, consider their opponent's viewpoint, use respectful words and body language with consideration of potential cultural differences, resolve disputes as quickly as possible, make calls in a consistent manner throughout the game, and only make a call where a breach is significant enough to make a difference to the outcome of the action. So, uh, sa madaling salita, yung pinopoint dito sa spirit of the game, be sportsmanship naman. Kung ano yung nasa grupo mo, yun din sa grupo ng iba, which is the respect. Kung meron mang problema, kailangan pag-usapan in a good way. Magsalita ng po at opo kung meron man, right? 2. The playing field. The playing field of the Frisbee or Ultimate. The playing field is rectangular area with dimension and zones as shown on figure 1 and should be essential flat, free of obstructions and afford reasonable player safety. So, ibalik na natin yung sa softball. Yung sa softball is diamond siya, pa-diamond siya. Unlike dito sa Frisbee is rectangular. Like sa court ng basketball, rectangular yan eh. So, yan din yung sa Frisbee. The perimeter lines around the playing field and consistent of two sidelines along the length of two end lines along the width. Meron siyang end zone and end zone sa kabila. The perimeter lines are not part of the playing field. The goal lines are the lines that separates the central zone from the end zone and are part of the central zone. So pag central zone, sa gitna talaga yan, sa gitna ng kanilang field. The brick marks are the intersection of two cross or 1 meter lines in the central zone, located a distance equal to the length of the end zone away from each goal line, midway between the sidelines. 8 bright colored flexible objects such as plastic cones mark the corners and central zone and the end zone. The immediate surrounding of the playing field shall be kept clear of movable objects. If play is obstructed by non-players or objects within 3 meters of the perimeter line, an obstructed player or thrower in possession may call violation. So yung kalaki ng kanilang field is 100 meter yung long and 37 meter naman. So yun yung rectangular niya. At sa end zone, meron siyang 18 meter. Sa central zone, 64 meters. And sa end zone ng kabila is 18 meter. The total of 100 meter long. The equipment. Alam naman natin yung equipment ng rules. Sorry. Alam naman natin yung equipment ng Frisbee. Yung disc lang, di ba? Any flying disc acceptable to both captains may be used. So, let's move to 4-point goal and game. A game consists of a number of points. Each points end with the scoring of a goal. So, pag makascore ka, pag makagol ka doon, tapos you are score na. A game is finished and won by the first team and score 15 goals. A game is separated into 2 periods of play. Called halves. Halftime occurs when a team first score 8 goals. The first point of each half starts when the half starts. After a goal is scored and the game has not been won or halftime has not been reached, the next point starts immediately. The team switch the end zone that they are defending and the team that scored becomes defense and pull next. Teams. Each team will put a maximum of 7 players and a minimum of 5 on the field during each point. So, ibig sabihin, sa field, meron siyang 7 players. Each team must designate a captain and the spirit captain to represent the team. So, before representing a team, kinakailangan meron siyang captain na isa. Sa out of 7, dapat merong isa na mag-represent. A team may make unlimited of substitutions after a goal is scored and before their team signals readiness for the pool. Streaks starting a game. Representatives of the two teams fairly determine which team first chooses either whether to receive or throw the initial pool or which end zone will initially defend. So, sa starting a game, meron talaga sa every two players, meron dalawang what you call this, mga teams na leader. Kung saan sila, kung line sa, ano ba sila, kung sa end zone ba sila or sa field. The other team is given the remaining choice at the start of the second half. These initial sections are switched. So, ibig sabihin kung, for example, kung mag-toss coin, head ako, so ako yung, sa akin yung decision, nasa akin yung decision kung mag-field ba ako or sa end zone ba kami. Yun. Number 7, the pool. At the start of the game, after halftime or after a score, play commences with a throw by the defense called a pool. Teams must prepare for the pool without any reasonable delay. The pool may be made only after both teams have signaled their readiness by having the pooler and a player on offense raise a hand above their head. Number 8. Let's move to number 8 now. State of play. Play is dead and no turnover is possible. After the start of a point until the pool is released, when the disc must be carried to the pivot location after the pool or turnover until a pivot point is established. After a call which stops the play or any other stoppage until a disc is checked in or after a disc hits the ground until possession is established by the appropriate team. Players are allowed to move during dead play unless specified otherwise. Play that is not dead is leave. 9. Stall count. The marker administered a stall count on the thrower by announcing stalling and then counting from 1 to 10. The interval between the start of each number in the stall count must be at least 1 second. The stall count must be clearly communicated to the thrower, and the marker may only start and continue a stall count when play is leave or until a pivot is established after a turnover. They are within 3 meters of the thrower's pivot point or the pivot location if the thrower is not at that location, and all defenders are legally positioned within section in 18.1. The check. Whenever play stops during a point for a foul, violation, contested turnover, specified turnover, contested goal, stoppage, discussion, or at the completion of a timeout, play must restart as quickly as possible with a check. The check may not only be delayed for the discussion of a call, player position after or a call, except in the case of a timeout and unless specified otherwise. If play stops before a pass is thrown, all players must return to the location they held when the call was made. If play stops after a pass is thrown, then, if the disc is returned to the thrower, all players must return to the location they held when the thrower released the disc or the time of the call, whichever is earlier. If the result of the play stands, all players must return to the location they held when either a player established possession or the disc hit the ground. If the player other than thrower gains possession as a result of the acceptable breach, all players must return to the location they held when the breach occurred, and all players must remain stationary in that location until the disc is checked in. 11. Out of bounds. Out of bounds. The entire playing field is in out of bounds. The perimeter lines are not part of the playing field and are out of bounds. All non-players are part of the out of bounds area. The out of bounds area consists of the ground which is not in bounds and everything in contact with it, except for defensive players who are always considered in bounds. An offensive player who is not out of bounds in bounds. An airborne player retains their inbounds out of the bounds status until that player contacts the playing field or out of bounds area. A player who has caught the disc, who contacts the playing field and then contacts an out of bounds area, is still considered in bounds as long as they maintain the catch until they establish possession. If they leave the playing field, they must establish a pivot point at that location on the playing field where they cross and perimeter the line, unless 4.3 is an effect. A thrower who contacts an out of the bounds area is considered in bounds until they make a pass. Contact between players does not confer the state of being in or out of bounds from one or to another. 12. Receivers and positioning. A catch occurs when a player has non-spinning disc trapped between at least two body parts. A catch can enable player to establish possession of the disc. So, receivers and positioning, that is a basic form of um, frisbee, di ba? Yung pag-receive and how the proper position of receiving a disc. If the player fails to maintain the catch due to subsequent ground contact related to the catch or contact related to the catch with a teammate or legitimate position of opposing player, possession is deemed to have not occurred. After establishing possession, the player becomes the thrower. If offensive and defensive player catch the discs simultaneously, the offense retains possession. A player in an established position is entitled to remain in that position and must not be contacted by an opposing player. Every player is entitled to occupy any position on the field not occupied by any opposing player, provided that they do not initiate contact in taking such position and are not moving in a reckless or dangerously aggressive manner. However, when the disc is in the air, player may not move in a manner solely to prevent an opponent from taking an occupied path to make a play on the disc. All players must attempt to avoid contact with other players, and there is no situation where a player may justify initiating contact. This includes avoiding initiating contact with a stationary opponent or an opponent's expected position based on their established speed and direction, making a play for the this is not valid excuse for initiating contacts with other players. 13. Turnovers. A turnover that transfers possession of the disc from one team to other occurs when the disc contacts the ground while it is not in the possession of an offensive player, a down. However, it is not down if a receiver catches a pass before the disc contacts with the ground and maintains the catch while the disc is in contact with the ground. A defensive player establishes possession of a pass. The disc becomes out of bounds and out of bounds or during the pull, the offense touches the disc before it hits the ground and subsequently fails to establish possession of the disc, a drop pull. A turnover that transfers possession of the disc from one team to another and result in stoppage of play occurs when there is an accepted offensive receiving foul. The thrower has not released the disc before the market first start to say the words 10 in the stall count or a stall out. The disc is intentionally transferred from one offensive player to another without ever being completely untouched by both players. A handover. The thrower intentionally deflects to pass to themselves of another player, a deflection. In attempting a pass, the thrower catches the disc after release prior to the disc being contacted by another player, or self-catch. An offensive player intentionally assists a team's movement to catch a pass, or an offensive player uses an item of equipment or object to assist a catching pass. If a player determines a turnover has occurred, they must take the appropriate all immediately. If the opposition disagrees, they may call contest, and play must stop if after discussion players cannot agree or it is unclear what occurred in the play. The disc must be returned to the last and not distributed thrower. After a stall out call, if the thrower still has a possession of the disc, but they believe a fast count occurred in such a manner that did not have a reasonable opportunity to call fast count before a stall out, the play is treated as either an accepted defensive bench or a contested stall out. If the thrower made a completed pass, the thrower can contest if they believe it was not a stall out or there was a fast count immediately prior to the stall out. If the thrower contests a stall out but also attempts a pass and the pass is incomplete, then the turnover stands and play restarts with a check. 14 is scoring. A goal is scored if an inbounds player catches a legal pass and all their ground contacts are entirely within their attacking end zone. Or for an airborne player, all of their first simultaneously points of ground contacts after catching the disc are entirely within their attacking end zone, and they subsequently establish possession of the disc and maintain the catch throughout all ground contact related to the catch zone. If a player believes a goal has been scored, they may call goal and play stops. After a contested or retracted call, play must restart with a check and the call is deemed to have been made when the player establishes possession. If a player in possession of the disc ends up with their selected pivot point behind the attacking goal line without scoring a goal according to 4.1, the player must establish a pivot point at that nearest location on the goal line. The time at which a goal is deemed to have been scored is when the player establish possession. 15. Calling fouls or infraction and violations. A breach of the rules due to non-minor contact between two or more opposing players is a foul. A player intentionally initiating minor contacts is still a breach of the rules but is to be treated as violation and not foul. A breach of the rules regarding marking or travel breach is an infraction. Infraction do not supply a stop play. Every other breach of the rules is a violation. Only the player fouled may claim a foul by calling foul. In general, only the thrower may claim an infraction by calling the specific name of the infraction. However, any offensive player may call a double team and any defensive player may call a travel infraction. Any opposing player may claim a violation by calling the specific name of the violation or violation unless specified otherwise by the particular rule. When a foul or violation call is made that stops play, player must stop play by visibly or audibly communicating the stoppage as soon as they are aware of the call, and all players should echo calls on the field. If play has stopped for a discussion without any call having been made, a call is deemed to have been made when the discussion started. Calls must be made immediately after the breach is recognized. After a player initiates a stoppage incorrectly, including after measuring a call, not knowing the rules, or not making the call immediately. If the opposition gains or retains possession, any subsequent play stands. If the opposition does not gain or retain possession, the disc must be returned to the last non-distributed thrower, unless applies. The stall count resumes as if an accepted breach has been caused by the player who initiated the stoppage incorrectly. If the player against whom the foul, infraction, or violation has been called disagrees that is occurred or does not think it is a correct call, they may call contest. If a player making any call subsequently determines that their call was incorrect, they can retract the call by calling retracted. The stall counts resume as if an accepted breach has been caused by that player. If multiple breaches occur on the same play or before play stops, the outcome should be resolved in reverse sequence. Latest breach first, earliest breach last. Players are encouraged to use the WFDF hand signals to communicate all calls. Verse 16. Continuation after a call. Whenever a foul violation call is made, or a player attempts to stop playing, in any way, play stops immediately and no turnover is possible unless in situations specified in 15.9, 16.2, and 16.3. 17. Fouls. Dangerous play. Action demonstrating reckless disregard for the safety of fellow players, or posing significant risk of injury to fellow players, or other dangerously aggressive behaviors are considered dangerous play and must be treated as a foul, regardless of whether or when contact occurs. This rule is not superseded by any other rule. If the dangerous play call is accepted, this must be treated as the most relevant foul from section 17. Receiving foul. A receiving foul occurs when a player initiates non-minor contact with an opponent before, while, or directly after either player makes a play on the disc. Strip fouls. A strip foul occurs when an opponent fouls a player and that causes the player to drop a disc they caught or to lose possession of the disc. Blocking fouls. A blocking foul occurs when a player takes a position that an opponent moving in an illegal manner will be unable to avoid taking into action and the opponent's expected position based on their established speed and direction and non-minor contacts results. This is to be treated as either a receiving foul of an indirect foul, whichever is applicable. Force out fouls. A force out foul occurs when a receiver is in the process of establishing possession of the disc and is fouled by a defensive player before establishing possession and the contact caused the receiver. Defensive throwing or marking fouls. A defensive throwing foul occurs when hanggang kailan a defensive player is illegally positioned section 18.1 and there is non-minor contact between the illegally positioned defensive player and the thrower, or a defensive player initiate the non-minor contacts with the thrower, or there is non-minor contact resulting from the thrower and the defender both vying for the same unoccupied position prior to the release. If a defensive throwing foul occurs prior to the thrower releasing the disc and not during the throwing motion, the thrower may choose to call the contact infraction by calling contact. After a contact infraction that is not contested, play does not stop and the marker must resume the false count at 1. Offensive throwing or thrower fouls. An offensive throwing foul occurs when the thrower is solely responsible for initiating non-minor contact with a defensive player who is in legal position. Contact occurring during the thrower's follow-through is not a sufficient basis for a foul but should be avoided. Indirect fouls. Indirect fouls occurs when there is non-minor contact between a receiver and a defensive player that does not directly affect an attempt to make a play on the disc. If the foul is not accepted, the foul player may make up any positional advantage caused by the foul. Offsetting fouls. If accepted fouls are called by offensive and defensive players on the same play, these are offsetting fouls and the disc must be returned to the last non-disputed thrower. If there is non-minor contact that is caused by two or more opposing players moving towards a single point simultaneously, this must be treated as offsetting fouls. However, if this occurs after this has been caught or after the relevant players involved can no longer make a play on a disc, this must be treated as an indirect foul, excluding contact related to section 17.1. 18, it's all about the infractions and the violation. So marking infraction include the following: fast count the marker, starts or continuous the stall count illegally, does not start or restart a stall count or stalling, counts in less than 1 second intervals, does not correctly reduce or reset the stall count when required, or does not start the count from the correct number. Straddle. A line between a defensive player's feet comes with one within diameter of the thrower's pivot point. Disc space. Any part of the defensive player is less than one disc diameter away from the torso of the thrower. However, if this situation is caused solely by movement of the thrower, it is not infraction. Wrapping. A line between defensive players' hands on arms comes within one disc diameter of the thrower's torso, or any part of the defensive player's body is above the thrower's pivot point. However, if this situation is caused solely by movement of the thrower, it is not an infraction, right? Double team. A defensive player other than the marker is within 3 meters of the thrower's pivot point without also guarding another defensive players. However, merely running across this area is not a double team. Vision. A defensive player uses any part of their body to intentionally obstruct the thrower's vision. Travel infraction. A thrower may attempt as fast at any time as long as they are entirely in bounds or have established in an bounds pivot point. 19. Safety stoppages. Safety stoppages. Injury stoppage. An injury stoppage or injury may be called by the injured player or by any player on the injured player's team. So, ibig sabihin, pag dito sa 19 na safety stoppages, pag merong injury or merong mga circumstances na nangyari between sa paglalaro ng frisbee, of course, the play was stopped, right? Yan yung safety stoppage. Kasi for the safety naman yan for players eh. If the injury was not caused by an opponent, the players must choose either to be substituted or to charge their own team with a timeout. So, after meron ng circumstances nangyayari or merong injury na nangyayari, automatically timeout yan and meron ding mag-substitute sa injury. 20 timeouts. The player calling a timeout must form a T with their hands or with one hand and a disc and shall call timeout to opposition players. So, yung merong sign yung timeout, parang ganito siya pati or kung sa kamay ganyan, kung sa disc naman is pag ganyan yung kamay tapos ganyan yung disc. So, same as lang. After the start of a point and before both teams have signaled readiness, a player from either team may call a timeout. The timeout extends time between the starts of the points subsequent to ball by 75 seconds. So, yung timeout sa kanila is about 75 seconds. After the pool, only a thrower with possession of the disc may call a timeout. The timer's out starts when the T is formed and lasts the 75 seconds after such a time. Substitutions are not allowed except for injury. So, sa timeouts, hindi siya allowed. Ibig sabihin, kung meron namang 75 seconds, hindi pwedeng mag-substitute or any player without injury. Yun yung rules dito. Player is restarted at the pivot location. The thrower must remain the same. All other offensive players must establish a stationary position at any location. Once the offensive player have selected positions, defensive players must then establish a stationary position at any location. The stall count restarts at maximum 9. However, if the marker has been switched, the stall count restarts as stalling 1. If the thrower attempts to call a timeout while play is live, and when their team has no remaining timeouts, play is stopped. The marker must add 2 seconds to the stall count they would have restarted play on before restarting play with a check. If this results in a stall count of 10 or above, this is a stall out turnover. So, that's it. And lastly, I read a definition of the yung mga nabanggit ko kanina from Rule 1 to Rule 20. So, para mas madaling maintindihan. Act of throwing, see throwing motion. So, ibig sabihin ng act of throwing, ito yung on how we throw, right? Kasi merong 3 types of throwing. Yung forehand, hammer, at saka yung backhand throwing. So, yan yung act of throwing. So, yung definition niya, see throwing motion. So, meron talagang motions yan, right? Affect the play. Affect the play. A breach affects the play if it is reasonable to assume that the outcomes of the specific play may have been meaningfully different had a breach not occurred. Attacking end zone, that the end zone in which the team in question is currently attempting to score. So, attacking the end zone, pag nandito ka yung score area mo doon sa kabilang end zone is attacking zone. You are attacking. You are attempting to make a score. Best perspective. The most complete viewpoint available by a player that include the relative position of the disc, ground players, and line markets involved in the play. Call. A clearly communicated statement that a foul, infraction, violation, turnover, or injury has occurred. Catch. Non-spinning disc trap between at least 2 body parts. If a player initially catches a pass and then, prior to establishing possession, they do not maintain the catch means to continue to have a non-spinning disc trapped between at least two body parts that initial catch is deemed to have ended. Central zone. So central zone, the area of playing field including the goal lines but excluding the end zones and the perimeters line. So yung central zone hindi kasali yung end zone na merong 18 meters yun. 18 meters kasi yung end zone eh. So yung sa gitna yung central zone. Defending end zone, the end zone in which the team is questioned is currently attempting to prevent opposition from scoring. So defending end zone, ibig sabihin yung area yung na bawal dapat pasukan or na makascore yung kalaban. Defensive player whose team is not possession of the disc. Ibig sabihin ng defensive player, ikaw yung nag-defense, which is sa madaling salita, hindi kayong humahawak ng disc. Kaya nga tinatawag kayong defensive player. End zone, one of the two areas at the end of the playing field where teams can score a goal by catching the disc there. Pag sabihin end zone, para itong sa basketball pa, parang ring. Yun. Para mas madaling intindihan. The goal line, the line separating central zone from each end zone is not part of the end zone. So pag sabihin goal line, is a line ng part ng end zone at saka yung central zone. Ground. The ground consists of all substantial solid objects including grass, marker, cones, equipment, water, trees, fences, walls, and non-players, but excluding all players and their worn clothing, airborne particles, and precipitation. Ground contact refers to all players' contact with the ground directly related to a specific event or maneuver, including landing or recovery after being off balance, e.g. jumping, diving, leaning, or falling. So guarding. A defender is a guarding an offensive player when they are within the 3 meters of that offensive player and are reacting to that offensive player. So pag sabihin guarding, you are guarding, ginaguard mo siya, binabantayan mo siya kung ikaw yung defensive player. Interception, when a player on the defensive team establishes possession for a throw by a player on the defensive team. Legitimate position, the stationary or moving position established by a player that is not in breach of any rules. Line, okay, that's considered as a boundary defining a player rules as a line. Making a play on the disc, when the disc is in the air or a player is attempting to make contact with the disc in any way, example, to catch or eat or to block it. Marker, the defensive player who may call the stall count the thrower. Minor contact, contact that involves minimal physical force and does not alter the movements or position under player. So yung minor contact, ibig sabihin kung merong contact na nangyari, physical contact na nangyari, non-player, any person including a team member who is not currently a player. Offensive player, a player whose team is in possession of the disc. So pag sabihin offensive player, yun yung team na mahawak ng disc to attempt to score sa kabilang end zone ng offensive, ng defensive player, I mean. Out of bounds or OB, everything that is not part of the playing field including the perimeter lines. Perimeter lines, lines separating the central zone or end zone from out of bounds area that are not part of the playing field. So, yung perimeter area, yun yung sa gitna, yung line mismo, yung literal na line mismo. Pivot, when the thrower moves in any direction while keeping one part of their body in constant contact with a specific point on the ground called the pivot point. Pivot location, the point on the playing field where the thrower is required to establish a pivot point after the turnover, after the pull, after a timeout, or after a leaving central zone, or where the pivot has already been established. So, ibig sabihin ng pivot location, ito yung kung saan kayo for example, ako yung humawak ng disc, tapos merong injury na nangyayari. Ibig sabihin, yung pivot location na yon sa playing field, ibig sabihin yung nasa gitna ako, ibig sabihin yung nangyari yung injury, nasa gitna ako. So, yung pivot location is nasa gitna. Kung saan yung disc, doon yung pivot location, right? Play. The time after the pool has commenced and prior to a scoring of a goal, play may further stop due to a call, in which case play is restarted with the check. Player, the people who are currently participating current point of the player. So that was what they consider. Playing field, alam natin yung playing field, ito is the area, yung the central zone consists of central zone, end zone, that's it. And possession of the disc, a player establishes possession of pass when they catch a pass and then they maintain that catch for more than one noticeable instant, and they maintain the catch throughout all ground contact related to the catch or until they throw the disc. Pre-stall. Pre-stall. A warning regarding time limits to the resume play issued by giving warnings at 20, 10, and 5 seconds as applicable. Pull. The throw by defense to the offense that starts play at beginning of the half or after a goal. The pull is not considered a legal pass. Receivers. All offensive players na tower. So, alam natin yung receiver, yung so offensive players na yan eh. Stoppage of play. Any halting of play due to a foul violation, discussion, contest, injury, or timeout that requires check out to restart the play. So, stoppage of play yan. Kung merong mga circumstances or negative situation na nangyayari, stoppage of play yung tawag dyan. Yung throw, alam natin yung throw, yung pagtapon. Yung thrower naman is a player. Yung throw is literal na throw, yung pagtapon. Yung thrower naman, yun yung mga offensive player. Player na yan, tao na yan. Throwing motion, ibig sabihin throwing motion, it is kung paano mo dinideliver yung bola, paano mo dinideliver yung disc, nandun yung before, tapos yung acceleration, nandun niya lahat yung motion. Turnover, any event resulting in a change of a team is a possession. A turnover is not considered a violation. Ibig sabihin ng turnover, kung offensive player, naging defensive player, naging offensive player. So, yun yung mga turnover. And for the last is where the disc stops. Refers to the location where a player establishes possession, where the disc comes to rest naturally, or where the disc is stopped from rolling or sliding. So, that's it for today. I hope meron kayong natutunan sa aking discussion about the rules of Frisbee or the ultimating. So, thank you for watching and see you next week.